Another draft physics video presentation. Camera's over here. Anyway, I'll learn eventually. New routines and such. So, comments we'll start with, and we'll see where we go from there. Howdy, Gary, Mr. Keeper. Gosh, we have yet another total solar eclipse viewable from a huge observatory telescope in South America, July 2nd, and I have not heard a single peep about reperforming this gold bending light around the sun. We are truly living in the dark ages. And so then Matthew Hargis posts a link to a page where, yes, a professor and some students are going to use an 11-inch telescope, which isn't great, but better than nothing. But the real problem is the eclipse apparently is really low on the horizon, so they're probably not going to be able to get the kind of images you need to do the experiment correctly. And so they'll just fudge their margin of error and say, yes, we did it, when they probably didn't do it. But we'll see. I mean, they're already talking. You know, when you go into an experiment, you know, already protecting yourself against failure, you know, the bullshit is the bullshit. So, yeah, it's not nearly as perfect as the eclipse over North America, where all the technology is. So I'm still going to argue, why did nobody do it when you had a perfect eclipse over North America? But anyway, we'll see what comes of it. I mean, to me, the obvious argument is that we have all these satellites in space. Again, you don't need a 10-inch telescope in space. You know, why hasn't it been done? Simple answer: can't be done, because light doesn't bend twice as much as every other thing in the universe. And even if it was to be bent, you know, if we were to assume that it was photons were matter that got bent by force, and that photons weren't actually just force, even if we make that assumption that photons can be bent, you know, first, they can't be bent twice as much for no good reason, and second, no, they aren't bent. It's just stupid. But anyway, so J. Ash asks, have you seen this Tim Maudlin video? No, I hadn't seen it. I don't know him. Perhaps you do. Well, he's a philosopher, but anyway, apparently knows something about physics, and yes, but based on this video, he may be a potential ally. Yeah, again, an ally that really isn't in the business. I mean, it's in the wrong business, so to speak. But yes, his critique of the assumptions built into quantum mechanics and the preposterous exaggerations is perfectly on point. So in that sense, he's an ally, because he's just pointing out that quantum theory isn't a very well evidenced theory, and it doesn't make any damn sense. So, yeah. But everybody should be able to admit some of these facts. The fact that there is the evidence is virtually nothing. I mean, that's why they even call their forces virtual forces, because they can't account for them. The evidence is so bad. Entanglement, all this stuff, horrible evidence. It's just all a pile of hype. And, you know, all these people defending hype, and that's all they're doing. By not admitting the simple thing, look, I want to believe in wave theory, I want to believe in ether, I want to do this, they should just admit it. And then say, okay, but I understand that for people who may be reasonable and not have a preference, a liking preference, there might be a rational argument here somewhere. So it's just like a vegetarian argument. I mean, nutritionally, you're so much better off with the vegetables. It's demonstrated that you'll live longer, and it's can't lose ethically as being superior. And so just quit making these fake arguments that somehow meat is necessary or meat is better, when it clearly isn't. So why are you pretending there's a preponderance of the evidence indicates you're better off eating meat? Why are you selling a lie just to defend your own preferences? And it's fine. Have your own preferences. Just admit you have a personal preference. You have a personal dependency. But don't pretend. It's like, you know, it's like pole vaulters arguing with high jumpers about whose sport is cooler. It's just bullshit. It's not even a good example because obviously vegetarianism is so much. If you were to choose which thing to be addicted to, vegetables are the flesh of animals. Frankly, if you made that choice, there'd be no reason to say, oh yes, I want to be addicted to the one that causes more pain and that is not as good for me, health-wise. Of course, you want to be addicted to the candy that does the least damage. It's just so fucking stupid. So anyway, this sort of relates to the David D. Hilster convention is happening. And apparently there's nobody there, of course. There's always 10 people. I don't know how they finance this whole thing. I don't know, whatever. You know, and the funny thing is the Hilster is basically saying in his first presentation that none of you people like me. You don't like my physics. You don't show it any respect. I'm going to start my own separate organization. You know, and it's just so funny. And he has this expectation that that somehow everybody else is going to say, wow, you really did something amazing, you know, with his particle theory. Now, I completely agree the universe is particles, but he has this idiot notion that somehow the universe is infinite in the sense that it's, you know, there's particles under the particles under the particles under the particles. Somehow that makes sense to him. And there's so many little elements, like his complete dismissal of the phenomenon of charge and calling it arbitrary. Like somehow the phenomenon of charge is arbitrary, when of course it's not. That's like saying magnetism is it's an arbitrary difference. Non-magnetic things are just like magnetic things. No, of course it's not arbitrary. There's nothing arbitrary about charge. It's the most dramatic frickin' function in physics. He calls it arbitrary. I mean, it's just such nonsense. Which relates to the next comment, which is going to be some asshole ragging about vocabulary. I mean, the word arbitrary means something, and it does means that there's no reasoning to base the distinction, and there's a huge reasoning to base the distinction. First, the recognition that charge is a real phenomenon, and dramatically in need of explanation. And there's a second part to that. You know, but you just can't deny its function. You know, it's a dramatic difference between things that have charge and things that don't have charge, and even between the charges, huge difference between this plus thing and this minus thing. Now, yes, which one you call plus and minus might be a little bit arbitrary, but obviously, as physics has learned, it's not really arbitrary because it has to do with what direction something's moving in. And it's a real thing that happens. Direction is a real thing. Left going right are different. They're not arbitrarily left and right. Now, whether we call it left, left, or right, right, doesn't really matter. But when you're using a plus and minus symbol, you're indicating a direction. So that makes sense. So there's nothing arbitrary about it. So he has a theory where he's saying basically there's no such thing as charge when it's like the whole universe runs on it. The distinction between positive and negative is the motivation, okay, for the movement of everything, frankly. Nothing would do anything without that distinction. So, hugely important. And his understanding of this particle theory, again, is he's got photons that are made out of a million little some other ton, you know, that are formed in wave patterns that, you know, it doesn't make any sense. Well, anyway, so he's sitting there saying, oh, look, I found the truth. And his truth is, you know, the small earth theory, you know, the tiny shred of, you know, nothing but superficial evidence defending any such notion. And all of the complex facts, all the facts that have to do with would it be possible, what would happen to the atmosphere, blah, blah, all the things that are sort of important. Now, we don't have any of those facts supporting the idea that the Earth was, you know, a few million years ago a much smaller thing, you know, less massive. no indication that this could possibly be true. No geological evidence that the moon was further away or closer, which would again be the implication of this expanding Earth bullshit. You know, things becoming more massive. So he throws this crap out like somehow we're supposed to say, oh yeah, that's perfect. You've tied it all together in a perfectly logical package, when no, you haven't. And it's always challenging just because all this stuff is invisible. And the only way you can make it visible is to collect facts about how it behaves. And then you can make it into something. It's like the difference between a bulldozer and a steamroller. And say you could never see the bulldozer, or you never see the steamroller, and all you could see is what kind of patterns they left behind, like flat roads or holes and stuff. And so you have to sort of figure out, well, what's this thing look like? What is it capable of that it made these impressions, or made these, has caused these effects? And that's all we have is the effects, and we're going to deduce retroduction. Well, here, I'll read this guy's comment just to get on the subject. I'm not sure you can even grasp the man's vocabulary. So he's implying that somehow Ken Wheeler has some sort of acute and articulate and well-presented vocabulary, which is just horseshit. Like, he uses big words in perfect locations and in beautiful ways, and it's just so articulate and so precise. He doesn't use precise language. Simplex. Simplex is a precise language. It's just bullshit jargon. You know, retroduction instead of just saying logic. There's no deduction, induction, retroduction. No, there's just facts, and you put them together. That's logic. There's deducing through that process, deduction. You don't need all these variants. Then he uses words like, you know, as I pointed out, dielectricity. There's no such thing as dielectricity. There's electricity, and it can be caused by different things, and it can manifest in different ways, but it's a specific thing. It's the transfer of pressure through a medium, which is going to have to be a conductor made of atoms. Electricity is atoms moving pressure. When the force is all by itself without going through the medium, that's when it's EMF, that's when it's magnetism, that's when it's gravity, that's when it's light. When it doesn't need a medium. I mean, you're just such what an idiot. A debate will be ill-advised. You know, you mean you're just defending him being a coward again? Again, I don't know how to say it any plainer. If I knew the truth, I would take on all comers, right? Because I'm going to win. I'd have no fear. And all he is fear. And he keeps talking about how he's won all these debates with Buddhists, and he's won all these debates with all these people he's had all these debates with. There's no evidence he's debated anyone in any forum where he has to be accountable. So there's just zero evidence that he's ever dealt with anyone's critique of his statements at all. So that's just horseshit. So again, who is this MacD guy? He's just defending cowards. You know, these people, they just constantly make rationalizations and excuses for the status quo, for crap, for shit, for things far below what they should be, and they keep making excuses for it because they're somehow what they want to rub his big fat belly. What the fuck is going on in their heads that they will justify the jargoneering that Ken Wheeler is guilty of? It's just fucking jargon. Alright, magnetism as explained by Stephen Adler. Okay, so we're supposed to know who Stephen Adler is. Yeah. So this is the part of what I'm supposed to have all of your social memes, your cliches are supposed to all be in my reservoir. I'm supposed to have wasted my time the way you've wasted yours. And again, there's no counter argument to a single thing I've said, no debunking of a single statement made by me, assertion made by me, nothing. You know, this is just such a weak argument you're making. You know, I've stated things in plain language that light isn't bent. I've stated, you know, Ken Willard claims it is, that anything happens instantaneous. So, you know, Ken Willard in his last video is arguing that somehow it's just obvious that there's instantaneous action at a distance. We don't have a shred of evidence that that happens anywhere in the universe. There's just not a single shred of evidence. So where do you get that from? How does he think the ancients believed in instantaneous because they couldn't do any better? And he thinks they were right. So he thinks spontaneous and instantaneous, that these are legitimate terms, that a modern educated human being would say, yeah, that's a great word. Soul, he thinks there's some reason people should use the word soul, like somehow a physicist should put it in his vocabulary somewhere. That's part of Ken Wheeler's vocabulary. There's a soul. What the fuck are you talking about? There's functions. We have functions, and the functions are based on mechanisms. You know, and the mechanisms, and we can call them programs, or we can call them emotions, we can call them lots of things, but they're mechanisms. They're hormones that trigger effects. They're little bulldozers running around inside of us that cause different effects, patterns of behavior. There's no room for any fucking soul, whatever the fuck that would be. So again, and so more vocabulary, metaphysics. I should pay any attention to a concept like that? What, physics and then there's metaphysics? Oh, you mean physics designed for religious people who want to fuck with the truth, who want to argue for things that there's no evidence for, who want to make up fairy tales about our existence. There's no fucking, there's physics. That's it. Even chemistry, biology, you know, all those subjects are just branches of physics, essentially. You could just call them biophysics or chemophysics or something like that, because it's really physics. It's really, the argument is just finding the mechanisms and describing how they function, the elemental functions. That's what physics is. So you have no respect for physics. You have no respect for the truth. You have no respect for honor or integrity in making arguments and statements. You think everything should be unaccountable, that it should just keep itself distant and separate, like Ken Wheeler, from critiques, from questioning, from interrogation. Why? You're just such despicable characters, and to sit there and have a cat icon like you, you know, there's no way you could be you're a cat eater. You're not a cat giver shitter about her. Because, you know, nobody who understands cats can be such a big asshole as you are. You're a fucking colossal asshole talking this shit. Like I'm the one arguing from the weak position. No, I'm arguing from the strong position, where I'm saying I'll take on all comers. Anybody who wants to make an argument, as long as I can interrogate you equally, as long as I can ask you as many questions as you're going to ask me. I mean, fuck you people. You're just so despicably cowardly. Alright, so it's probably enough of the subjects, really. I mean, it was interesting. So I did watch the D. Hilster, and again, he makes his argument as if all he has to do is say, charge is arbitrary. There, I've proved it's arbitrary by saying it's arbitrary. It's an insane statement. He says infinity is obvious somehow. He says, Borkert says it's an infinite universe, therefore it's an infinite universe. That's not an argument. I can't do anything with that. Where's the logic in any of this crap? Again, you know, I can make these comparisons, but I mean, you know, the big universe doesn't function like the little universe. We can kind of dissect its function and say, no, it's an emergent property of the small universe. It has the same rules as the small universe, not vice versa. You know, it doesn't have these clear mechanisms where there's photons of equal energy and there's quanta and you know, speeds that are you know, either the speed of light, or you know, you capture energy and you move some variable speed. I mean, there's none of the same rules in the big universe that you have in the small universe. The small universe is quantized, and it really isn't going to be big universe all the way down. It's just stupid to think so, that the same forces are just going to be duplicated at half as small and twice as fast. There's just no evidence of any of that crap. So he proposes that there is such a thing as a force moving twice this, the speed of light squared. Absolutely zero evidence. Talks about how, well, we can talk to Mars in 4 minutes. Blah, 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 some other crap in 4 seconds or whatever. And you're like, well, we don't have any evidence any of that's attainable, or that there's any indication there's any such thing. He's just making this crap up and then saying, I'm very disappointed that you all haven't fallen for it. Well, it's a crappy explanation that doesn't account for what we know to be physical facts about electrons and photons, that they're not the same goddamn thing. That's it. That's his proposal, that somehow electrons and photons are the same thing, when clearly photons aren't charged, which is a huge difference. Well, anyway, just stupid. I mean, not charged in the same way. They are responsible for charge, but they are not the mechanism through which charge is manifest, but they are not the manifestation of charge. So just, so stupid. So yeah, so the good news is at least there's some philosophical type person talking about how he doesn't see the reasoning to all this hype about quantum mechanics because the evidence does suck. So that's good. It's bad that all the dissidents are just talk shit. I mean, it's not like they sit there and feel like they can meet a higher standard of evidence. Their standards are just as low as conventional physics in terms of demonstrating anything with by pointing out how it meets all of the conditions that you have to meet. You have to meet a lot of conditions. You have to do a lot of thinking about a model. Because I went through the process, I know. That's why it took this long. Part of the reason is that somebody comes up with a counter argument. Well, what about? And then you have to say, okay, I have to explain that. You can't just leave it there and pretend it doesn't exist as a problem. And solving those problems takes time. And even though the answers turned out to be so simple that somebody else should have done it by now. I mean, this is an airplane that should have flown a long time ago in terms of recognizing that this concept of force, again, all the forces moving the same speed, is just an indication you have to unify them. You have to come up with a model where they're all made of the same stuff, that the magnetism, the electricity, the gravity, and the nuclear forces are the same thing, the same event, just happening in a slightly different way. And it turns out, yeah, that's the truth, with just a simple recognition that the force is quantums of energy moving at the speed of light, that the force is never destroyed. It's either just captured, that is temporarily caught somewhere where it can't get out, but it still went in as a real force, and you're just trapping its vector of direction. Its initial direction is what you've captured by trapping it, by forcing it to go in a circle, by not allowing it to get where it's going, and that everything is a consequence of taking force and not allowing it to go where it was going and sending it someplace else. And that's what all the interactions in the universe are kind of based on, is the fact that you can either reduce pressure or increase pressure on something and cause it to move. It doesn't move through some internal will. It moves because something either absorbed energy or released energy, and in the form of force, in the form of something, quanta, moving the speed of light. And alright, so the real problem is having this conversation is that it has to be ordered. It has to be a structure. Like you start with the push-pull argument. Then you start with an argument about the necessity of a medium. Do we need the medium? Does a medium matter? Because I don't care one way or the other. You want to call the force ether, perturbations, it doesn't matter to me, as long as you understand that the ether has to have energy in it to start with. Your model has to have an energetic ether, or you're not going to explain gravity. It's just not going to happen. Because you have to explain where the energy comes from, and the only place it can come from is out there, because we know how much energy is in the stuff itself. We know how much energy is in the earth, and we know how much energy is in the sun, and we know that neither one are using any of their stored energy to move towards each other. So we know the energy has to come from somewhere else. We look at a magnet. Obviously, the energy is not coming from the magnet. The magnet doesn't make pull force and a wave force. It doesn't make any new force. It doesn't burn anything to force something to move towards it or to expel something away from it. So clearly, it has to be taking energy that exists and is merely filtering it. I mean, it's just so obvious an answer. And it's decidedly filtering it all, electron force one end, all proton force the other end, reflective, proton reflective and electron reflective. And that's why the whole charge thing works, and it explains where the energy comes from, and it's just, but anyway, yeah, so segment the conversation in understanding that every single experiment has to be accounted for, and that all the experiments are really just showing you effects, because you're not going to be able to see the little bits that are causing it because they're tiny. And we're just merely going to sit there, what's a reasonable deduction based on the evidence that exists? And the conventional idiots are saying it's reasonable to accept the assumptions, the guesses they've just pulled out of their asses, like dark matter and entanglement and all kinds of other nonsense, when the simple answer is no, there's left and right particles. Obviously, it's not annihilation when nothing's annihilated. You can't use the word annihilation to describe an event that doesn't really eliminate anything. You know, this is just bullshit. You don't say anti-divergence, okay, to describe something that's obviously a convergence, and it's being converged because it's being pushed. Yeah, so anyway, but that's the real challenge here, is to attempt to find some agreement. Like, let's agree on the 10 things, the 10 most important pieces of evidence that you have to account for, and then you know, have some agreement that you have to provide evidence, that you have to be able to cite how the evidence is consistent with what you're arguing as something existing. If you're going to claim dark matter exists, you have to claim it based on more than, well, it makes our broken math not look as broken. You know, that's just not good enough reason to believe it exists. All right. So, I mean, I wish I could have some more direct interaction. It's just too bad that all these people are unwilling to invest in conversation. That, you know, obviously there's going to be contention in those conversations, but they need to take place, and because all these people just keep making unaccountable statements. They just keep claiming things to be true, and that they show no evidence demonstrating them to be true, no good evidence. And even understanding that, I guess the whole thing can't happen if people have no standards for the burden of proof. So if you can just go into court and you can have some, you know, old lady who's blind in one eye and you know, can't remember where she lives, and blah, 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 and you know, you put her on the stand and she says, yeah, I think that tall guy over there did it, or some kind of bullshit like that, and you say, oh, that's good enough evidence, let's convict, because we want to convict the guy. You know, and that's all you're doing. I mean, the evidence is garbage for these hard, you know, you're making these statements as if you're absolutely certain this is the way it is, and the evidence just doesn't defend that certainty in any way whatsoever. It's just horrible. So there has to be some agreement that you really do have some burden. If you're going to go into court and say there's dark matter, you're going to go and you say there's entanglement. You need more than an obscure, highly complex experiment that does a little bit of statistical analysis to say it's true. You need better evidence than that. Come on. I mean, it's just so bad. But yeah, there's just no way to have the debate if you don't have any respect for the burden. If you think you can just claim it, and because everybody else says so, you win. I mean, that's just bullshit. You have to make the evidence the argument, and the evidence sucks for all these claims. They make the claims, and the evidence sucks when you look at it. All right. And you know, like I say, it's so obviously bad. They have nothing, again, no explanation for where the energy comes from for the simplest one, gravity. Their explanation of magnetism is to say the word virtual photon, to say there's a force carrier. They don't explain how the force carrier makes positive and negative both. How somehow it knows how to be positive and then how it knows to be negative in terms of attraction and repulsion. No explanation of how the two effects of repulsion and attraction are manifested by this force. Not even a fair and accurate description of how the force lines, how the intensity of the force is mathematically formalized, in the sense that the math is completely based on the idea that the force radiates from the objects, and they keep talking as if it waves from the objects when there's no mathematical evidence of a wave built into it. Waves can be emergent, but the basic function is not waving a force, it's radiating a force. And they don't even get that part right, so they even lie about something as fundamental as Maxwell and Faraday in terms of how they described the precise cause and effect of how the force manifests. And they're not even true to their own drawings and their own explanation of the mechanism as they could detail it. So yeah, how can you have conversation with people that's dishonest? You kind of can't. So I haven't. That's one of the reasons, but I guess the biggest reason is because they're just fucking cowards. Cowards being defended by bigger cowards. You know, I mean, all these Ken Wheeler defenders, there's nothing to defend. He's an overt exaggerator who just takes grotesque liberties because he evades accountability. He avoids it. He makes it not happen by his will, by his intent, by his strategy, by his scheme. And you dupes are just too stupid. Alright, so enough. Yeah, that's probably enough. Get to some other stuff, some drawings, maybe. We'll see next time. Blah blah blah. I mean, I've been over it already. Really, you know, it's like I said. The magnetism, the subject videos are there in a playlist. Most of them are pretty good. I could do them better, no doubt now, but they're pretty good. And make an argument. Point out how something's wrong, and I'll point out how, no, you're wrong, because it's right. It's the way it actually works. And it's an explanation that ties it all together. It all fits. It's round peg in round hole. Show otherwise. If you're going to claim otherwise, show otherwise. Show how it doesn't work. Ugh. Okay, so anyway, till next time and such.